Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, February 25th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the 2022 United States gubernatorial elections that are going to be taking place this midterm season. And there are a number of races that are up for grabs, over 30 governor seats that are up, I think a total of maybe 33, 34, if my number is correct. I think 34 is the right number. But looking at the amount of governorships up, just the sheer amount in itself means that this year, 2022, is going to be the most monumental year for governorships, for gubernatorial elections. And, right now, the current composition is 27 Republicans to 23 Democrats. This is what the current governor's bi-party system looks like. There are a number of wide-ranging Democrats and Republicans all in various states, in very surprising states, which makes the governor elections fairly interesting because they don't always abide by the standard set of rules that you might expect in some of these key states. They typically apply to House districts, Senate elections, and presidential elections, but the governorships, things are completely different. Louisiana just elected a Democrat back in 2019, as did Kentucky, two states that voted for Donald Trump by double digits in the 2020 and 2016 election, and Mitt Romney and John McCain. Looking at that Kansas victory, Donald Trump just won that state by nearly 15 percentage points in the 2020 presidential election. Well, it went to the Democrat back in 2018 by 4 percentage points. On top of that, Vermont and Maryland and Massachusetts are amongst the most Democratic states in the entire country. They have Republicans that were just all elected recently in 2020 or 2018 by double digits. So the governor elections certainly offer a very interesting perspective to a number of races and states and why they vote certain ways, especially on this level. And the reason why governor elections might vary this way is, plainly put, it has no impact on any other state or any other type of congressional or presidential delegation. Because the governor's race has no impact on any state but your own. While there may be some type of mention of state relations or, the National Governors Association, this is by no means comparable to the United States Senate or the United States House of Representatives. They never act as an entire legislative body. We never see that happen, especially, given that the governorship is so reserved for local matters, because it should be. This is one of our few non-national positions. It will it will bring you to national prominence, but it probably won't, have a dramatic impact. Who cares about what Governor Tom Wolf says in Nevada, right? Versus a senator in Pennsylvania could directly impact the state of Nevada, or a representative at that, or of course a president. But overall, the governorships are very localized, which is why states like Maryland and Massachusetts and Vermont are so open to electing Republicans if they are locally known names, or if they think that there's a dire need in terms of leadership change. So looking at the map so far, that's why you may see some states like Kansas in the Democratic column. Then you also see Vermont rated as safe for the GOP. It's a very interesting time period. It's very interesting to say the least, just looking at the governor election results. But let's go back. Let's take a look at 2018 and talk about what we're working with here. And what to expect in the 2022 governor elections? Probably a very similar map to what we saw in 2020. What does that mean? It means that states are getting more polarized, and while there are always going to be outliers like Kansas and Maryland and Vermont and Massachusetts, there's always going to be, at the same time, people that do follow down party line. And, that's actually the case in a lot of these states. The reason why Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania went to the Democratic Party in 2018 was mainly because the Democratic Party had such a favorable environment, they were able to do very well. There's also a reason why Florida remained in the GOP column, defying all expectations. Donald Trump support there was too much to overcome, considering that base was tapped into. Also, one could argue that Bill Nelson had a lackluster campaign, but Andrew Gillum might have as well. That all ultimately comes down to who is assessing the campaign. But at the end of the day, the reason why we saw the Republican Party and the Democratic Party win in certain regions of the country is because that's where their coalition is. That's where they have won, historically speaking. So it didn't really surprise too many people that Nevada and New Mexico flipped back to the Democratic Party, and the Republicans were able to hold the states of Ohio, Florida, and Iowa, and even Georgia in that instance. So looking at the 2018 governor map, we only have one flip for the GOP, and that's in the state of Alaska. All the flips for the Democratic Party we have in Nevada, we have in New Mexico, in Kansas, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Maine. And, none of these were real surprises. In fact, besides Kansas, these pretty much all matched the 2016 and 2012 election results, with the exception of course, the states that were rated as safe from the beginning, or states that were, re-electing incumbent Republican governors. So that means Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maryland. But once you take those out and you take out Kansas, you're pretty much looking at the 2012 map combined with the 2016 performance of Trump in Iowa, Ohio, and Florida. But let's take a look at 2014. With all this discussion that this might be a red wave year, could we expect a map like this? Well, because 2014 was such a very phenomenal year for the Republican Party, they were able to flip states like Maryland, flip states like Massachusetts. These were very close races. Now we see Charlie Baker winning 30% more of the vote than his Democratic opponent. Just 4 years prior, he had won by under 2 points. In Maryland, Larry Hogan won. If you're looking at the 2018 election results, Larry Hogan won by double digits. Looking at 2014, well, this was a state decided by more than Massachusetts, but still, not even over 5 points. And, this boils down to the fact that Obama at this point, he wasn't super unpopular, but he certainly wasn't popular. And that's why we saw a drawback. The reason why Larry Hogan and Charlie Baker won was because of the anti-Obama coalition, the anti-Obama wave year, which was 2014. That even brought states like Illinois to flipping towards the Republican Party. But it wasn't all bad for the Democratic Party. I mean, they were able to pick up Alaska in a way. They were able to pick up Pennsylvania. Tom Wolf won by a very large amount and then won again by a very large amount in 2018. But looking around the map, I mean, Michigan, Wisconsin all remained with the GOP. Ohio, Iowa remained with the GOP. Georgia wasn't even really competitive. Florida went to Rick Scott again. New Mexico went to the Republican Party by double digits. Arizona, same deal. Nevada won with 71% of the vote. I mean, Texas went to the Democrats over Wendy Davis, as was thought to be a winnable race. And remember that Kansas state that flipped? Looking at the election margin, it was still close. So Kansas has actually had a history of it being close, surprisingly. And, I think that largely has to do with the fact that governor elections don't always replicate the national numbers, but in most cases they do, which is exactly what we saw in 2018 and what's exactly, what we're going to see in 2022. And, if we apply the 2020 map, let's take a look at what happens to this map. You would put Pennsylvania and Maryland back in the Democratic column. You would have to flip New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont. You would have to flip Arizona, but you would also have to give the Republicans back the state of Kansas. But the Democrats would pick up Georgia in return. And where does this put us? Well, this puts us actually at 28 Democratic governors to 22 Republicans. That's actually a pretty good position. But also, you do have to realize that, these Republican incumbents in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, if they choose to run again, Charlie Baker can, Phil Scott can, Chris Sununu can. If they do, safe red entirely. But if Chris Sununu decides to run for Senate, I wouldn't actually say New Hampshire is safe red straight off the bat. So you see, what we're going to be looking for throughout this entire map is just comparing it to the 2020 map and seeing relative to the 2014 and 2018 performances to deem whether or not 2022 was truly a red wave year, a blue wave year, or just a mediocre year for the Democratic Party. And I say for the Democratic Party because they are the incumbent party. They are going to be playing defense the next 2 years. They have to be. Otherwise, they would just be completely giving up every race to the Republican Party. Defense will matter for the Democrats here. I honestly don't think that they're going to be able to have super easy pickups. If they're going to win Georgia, it's going to be through Stacey Abrams. If they're going to win Arizona, they're going to need a very strong candidate. Right now, I'm not saying that it's going to be super easy. I don't think they're the favorites right now, but things can change. And, for the Democratic Party's sake, God forbid that Republicans choose to run for re-election in this region. This is an untapped gold mine for the Democratic Party once they retire. Unfortunately, they have no incentive to retire. They are going to be constantly re-elected at this point. Larry Hogan is being forced to retire. He has to retire. And that's why we're actually seeing it start out as a likely Democratic state, not with the GOP, because Maryland's history, well, it's going to revert back to how it votes on the presidential level, which is why Florida will likely remain with the GOP in 2022, which is why Georgia could potentially go to the Democrats in 2022, why Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota might vote the same way they did on the presidential level. So when I'm looking at this map, I don't expect too many variations from the 2020 election results. Honestly, we could see something as a mix between 2018 and 2014. Not a red wave year, not a blue wave year, just a year where we are going to be worried more about COVID than we are about the wave or the retaliation against President Biden. And, just looking at a number of these competitive states, I do think that there are going to be a number of them. Maryland will likely be included. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa and Ohio will probably remain safe. Minnesota will probably remain safe. I mean, it'll remain solid for the respective parties. Virginia won't be competitive in 21. New Jersey certainly won't unless we see something drastically shift nationwide. But if, let's say, Chris Sununu decides to run for Senate, well, New Hampshire is now back in play. The Democratic Party could see Maine get competitive, but I really don't think it's going to be the likeliest scenario. Nevada, absolutely, could become competitive. Arizona, considering Doug Ducey is not going to be running there, absolutely. Kansas will be competitive. Georgia will be competitive. Florida, it really depends. Depends on the year. If it's a mediocre year for the Democratic Party, no, the GOP is going to win there. Texas is probably still going to go to the GOP. So what we're looking at is that there are some states that were toss-ups in 2018. Nevada, Kansas, Wisconsin, Michigan. But we're seeing new states, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Hampshire. These weren't toss-ups in 2018. Georgia was a toss-up in 2018. Kansas was a toss-up. Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan. But so were Ohio and so were Iowa. They probably won't be in 2022. Given that these governors are going to be able to probably sort a re-election given the overwhelming margin Donald Trump won here back in 2020, I wouldn't be surprised if these states were rated as likely or safe from the beginning. Florida, realistically, we're talking about the possibility of a mediocre year. Even a Democrat +8 national environment couldn't flip Florida. Now, Florida is very interesting. Even in red wave years, it goes to the Republican Party by very narrow amounts. But if it's mediocre, it probably isn't enough to boost the Republican base there out. So I'm going to say Florida for right now probably won't be one of those super competitive states as it was in 2018. In fact, I think it was the closest state on this entire map, decided by 0.4% for this governorship. Very, very close, but at the end of the day, that closeness ultimately resulted in a Republican victory. And I don't think Florida is going to be, close, too close at least, in 2022. So some new states, some old states thrown into the fray. Ultimately, the Republican Party will likely start out with 23 solid states and the Democrats 18. This puts them at an even worse position because let's say, for instance, the Democratic Party experiences a red wave. Well, that opens up the possibility of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania going to the GOP. They're already back to where they began after 2019. Nevada, Arizona, Georgia could all go to the GOP. I mean, they all have in the past decade. New Hampshire with the GOP currently. Let's say in their worst case, Maryland and Kansas revert back to GOP, holds. This could be a 2014 type year. And because we are seeing a number of states remain competitive, mainly Democratic states, that's what's going to hurt them. But also, one could argue that let's say the Democratic Party has a phenomenal year. They win Nevada, they win Arizona, they win Georgia, they win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they win New Hampshire, they win back Maryland, they hold on to Kansas. Well, where does this put them? It actually only puts them right where the Republicans are today. You see, it would take a lot more work for the Democratic Party to expand their majority to the likes of which the Republican Party has been enjoying for quite some time now. And, looking at 2022, I don't think it's going to be a super favorable year for the Democratic Party. A lot of things are going to blow back, especially in more conservative states. You see, the strange thing about the Democratic electorate is that they are much more inclined to vote for Republicans, as we've seen historically, than Republicans are to vote for Democrats. There's a reason why we see Vermont give the Republican governor there, despite voting for Biden by one of the largest margins out of any state. The governor's margin in 2020 was the largest in Vermont out of all states. And we had very solid Republican states up for grabs. It was a 40-point margin for Governor Phil Scott. Looking at history, for whatever reason, Democrats really like liberal Republicans, especially in states where this governor election has no impact on others. And while there are historical states that where the history tells us that they love conservative Democrats, in today's day and age, not so much. I find it very interesting that Democrats have been very easily electing Republicans, especially in the Northeast, where Democrats would have a very difficult time. Otherwise Billy Sutton would have been governor in South Dakota after 2018. And maybe it wouldn't be in such a arguably, bad position. And based off the COVID-19 cases, I think it's roughly 1 in 15 people in the entire state have tested positive. I mean, it's very interesting to see the implications of that. But looking at 2022, we probably won't see a competitive South Dakota anymore. We probably won't see a competitive Iowa anymore or a competitive Ohio. I mean, it will come down to who the nominees are going to be. It looks as if Mike DeWine might get a primary from a Trump-backed candidate. We don't know yet. But overall, we probably won't see the same type of competitive states that we saw back in 2018. And I actually think that's sort of unfortunate just because that really adds to our overall discourse that states aren't going to be super polarized, that they aren't going to vote just in one direction because of the way they voted on the presidential level. But we've sort of drawn away from that. Very much so. Looking at 2014's numbers, right after the 2012 election, think about the amount of flips there. Nevada was a flip. New Mexico, Ohio, Iowa, Florida, Maryland, Wisconsin, Michigan, Massachusetts, Maine. That's 10 states. And I might be missing one. 10 states that flipped away from the Democratic column. Look at 2018. Well, let's look at that. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania relative to 2016. Okay, they flipped. Kansas, that's fourth. Looking around, I don't see any others. In terms of states that voted against the overall direction, well, you would have to add in, let's see, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maryland. So that brings us to around, let me recount really quickly. That brings us to around 7, or it should be more than 7. I think that should be 8 in total. But I mean, even then, that brings us to a point that's not even the same amount as 2014. And, Obama had won more states. And also, looking at the 2020 map, well, 2018 actually reflected that more. And, outside of this very, pocketed area, I would say, this very minuscule region of the United States, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party pretty much performed the same way they did. And looking at 2022, my case is made even stronger. Because chances are we will see Kansas, now that there's going to be a competent Republican nominee, revert back to the GOP. Now that we have competitive candidates in Arizona and Georgia and retiring incumbents in one of them, they could go to the Democratic Party. Democrats probably won't be competitive in South Dakota anymore. Probably won't be competitive in Iowa or Ohio. Democrats in all likelihood will be able to flip New Hampshire if Chris Sununu decides to run. So if we're comparing this new 2022 map to the 2020 election results, I don't see any states out of the ordinary except for Vermont and Massachusetts. And while this just may be poor timing for the GOP or the Democratic Party, depending on which state you're looking at, ultimately it comes down to the fact that our states have become more and more polarized. And looking at the 2022 map, you should likely expect a map that might be good for Republicans in certain areas and good for Democrats in others, ultimately bringing us to just an map, but something that I think will be a very good, would have a very strong resemblance, I'll say that, of the 2020 election results. That's what I'm expecting to see in 2022. Just based on how far states have moved to the right or to the left, we probably won't see Democrats becoming competitive in South Dakota again or Republicans in Maryland. But we still have to see. We have 2 years to go, and, we could see Lieutenant Governor of Maryland decide to run, or Billy Sutton decides to run again in South Dakota, and Kristi Noem dips in approval. Whatever we want to see, we probably will. Chances are that this is going to be a very competitive election cycle, regardless if it's a red wave year or a blue wave year. So we still have to see a lot of money is going to be funneled into these races. But so far, we're probably going to see a lot less split ticket voting than what we saw back in 2014 or 2018. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 gubernatorial election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.